You won't believe how a small mistake turned into a complete shock for everyone at this luxury car dealership. When an elderly couple walked in, no one could have predicted what would happen next. Watch until the end to see how one action can change everything. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The glass doors of the luxury car dealership slid open with a soft whoosh, allowing the morning sunlight to spill into the showroom. The space inside sparkled under crystal chandeliers, their shimmering lights dancing over the sleek surfaces of million-dollar vehicles lined up like prized jewels. The scent of polished leather and fresh wax hung heavy in the air, wrapping the dealership in a cocoon of wealth and exclusivity. Into this world stepped an elderly black couple. Their presence seemed to halt the rhythm of the dealership in an instant. The man, wearing a worn khaki jacket, a neatly pressed but aged white shirt, and simple trousers, walked with a slight limp. His wife, gracefully supporting him, wore a modest floral dress and held her handbag tightly against her side. Her hair was pinned up carefully, and there was a nervous gentleness to her smile as she looked around at the glittering showroom. Their arrival drew immediate attention. Conversations faltered, the clinking of coffee cups slowed, and eyes, curious, skeptical, judgmental, turned toward them. A young woman perched on a velvet couch, designer sunglasses resting on her nose, lowered them to stare openly at the couple. Nearby, a sharply dressed man in a tailored black suit whispered something to a colleague, a smirk tugging at his lips. The mood in the dealership shifted. The previously lively atmosphere thickened with discomfort and disdain. The elderly couple, seemingly used to such attention, moved cautiously further into the showroom. They marveled at the sleek, glistening cars from a respectful distance, their eyes filled with wonder but also hesitation, as if afraid to breathe too close to the luxury that surrounded them. The woman whispered to her husband, her voice tight with worry. "I don't feel right about this," she said softly, her fingers tightening around his arm. "Maybe we should leave." He patted her hand gently, offering a small, reassuring smile. "We haven't done anything wrong. We're just looking," he replied, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of pain he couldn't quite hide. From across the room, a sales associate had been watching them coldly. He wore an immaculate black suit, his blonde hair slicked back meticulously. Adjusting his tie, he exchanged a knowing glance with another associate before striding toward the couple with a calculated air of superiority. The sharp click of his expensive leather shoes on the marble floor echoed ominously as he approached. His name was John Williams, a senior salesperson known for his arrogance and his selective treatment of customers. He stopped a few feet away from the couple, deliberately keeping a cold, dismissive distance. His gaze, sharp and piercing, traveled slowly from the man's old shoes to the woman's simple dress, lingering disdainfully on their dark skin. "Good morning," John said, his tone syrupy with forced politeness. A half-smile pulled at his lips, one that didn't reach his icy blue eyes. "I think there's been some kind of mistake." The elderly man looked confused. "We're just here to look," he said, his voice calm, though a line of worry etched itself deeper into his forehead. John chuckled softly, a sound devoid of warmth. His arms crossed over his chest in a stance of blatant arrogance. "What I mean is," he said slowly, his voice dripping with contempt, "this dealership isn't exactly for people like you." The final words were delivered with a heavy, deliberate pause, his eyes once again flickering meaningfully over their skin. Behind him, a few customers and employees stifled giggles. The young woman with the designer sunglasses smirked openly, whispering something to her companion. Another employee holding a catalog turned her head away, unsuccessfully hiding her amusement. The elderly woman clutched her husband's hand tighter, her knuckles whitening. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to show weakness. Her husband straightened his back, fixing John with a calm, steady gaze. "We just wanted to look at the cars," the man said quietly, his voice firm but dignified. "You have no right to insult us." John shrugged lazily, completely unbothered. "Oh, I'm not insulting you," he said with a mocking smile. "Just stating the truth. These cars start at $900,000. People like you surely can't afford them." A few employees chuckled openly now, no longer bothering to hide their disdain. The atmosphere in the dealership grew heavier, thick with unspoken mockery. In the distance, Emily Torres, a young Latina sales associate, watched the scene unfold with growing horror. She gripped the stack of documents in her hands tighter, her face flushing with anger and shame. Everything inside her screamed to intervene, to stop this blatant injustice. But before she could move, the elderly couple quietly turned away. Without raising their voices, without making a scene, they headed toward the door, their heads held high despite the humiliation burning their hearts. They walked past the staring eyes, past the smirks and the laughter, past the judgment that weighed down on them like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The luxurious glass door closed behind them with a soft but final thud, sealing them out of the world that had so cruelly rejected them. Outside, under the glaring sun, the elderly woman trembled. She gripped her husband's arm tightly, seeking strength. He let out a soft sigh, his proud shoulders slumping under the invisible weight of the moment. "I'm sorry, dear," he said, his voice thick with regret. "We shouldn't have come here." The woman shook her head fiercely, blinking back tears. "No," she whispered. "It's not our fault. It's theirs. I just didn't expect. After all these years." Her voice broke, and she fell silent. Through the dealership's glass walls, John Williams stood smugly watching them, his arms crossed, a triumphant smirk plastered across his face. He exchanged glances with his colleagues who whispered and laughed among themselves, their voices a cruel backdrop to the elderly couple's quiet suffering. The couple slowly descended the stone steps, their movements weary and burdened. They stood for a moment on the busy sidewalk, watching the traffic pass by, the world bustling and oblivious to the small, deep pain they carried within them. The woman turned back one last time. Through the glass, she caught Emily Torres's gaze. Emily stood frozen, her face filled with helplessness and guilt. In that brief exchange of looks, a silent understanding passed between them, an acknowledgment of the wrong that had been done. The woman turned away, and at last the tears she had fought so hard to hold back slid down her cheeks. "Let's go home, dear," her husband said softly. "This place isn't for us." They walked away, their figures blending into the crowd, carrying with them a silent wound, a wound that would not easily heal. The evening sun cast a soft golden glow across the large villa, its elegant walls catching the last light of the day. Inside the dining room, the atmosphere was unusually quiet. The polished mahogany table was set beautifully, silverware gleaming under the chandelier's warm light. But the usual laughter and light-hearted conversation were absent. Seated across from each other, the elderly couple ate slowly, mechanically. Their favorite dishes, prepared lovingly by the housekeeper, sat mostly untouched on their plates. They pushed the food around silently, neither speaking nor making eye contact, their minds elsewhere. At the head of the table sat their son, Michael. A young, accomplished CEO in the black business community, Michael was used to read-in rooms, sensing unspoken tensions, and tonight it was impossible to ignore. His parents, usually so full of gentle conversation and warmth, seemed weighed down by an invisible burden. He set down his fork quietly and took a sip of water, studying them. "Is something wrong?" he asked gently, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. His parents looked up almost simultaneously, startled. The father cleared his throat and forced a small, tired smile. "Oh, it's nothing, son," he said with a strained casualness. "We're just a bit tired." Michael tilted his head slightly, not buying the excuse. His gaze was calm but insistent. "I know you both too well to believe that," he said softly. "Please, if something's bothering you, tell me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The mother dropped her gaze to her plate, her fingers nervously twisting the napkin in her lap. The father glanced at her, then back at Michael, struggling internally. Finally, it was the mother who broke the silence. Her voice was small, shaking slightly. "We went to a car dealership today," she said, her eyes still fixed on the untouched food. "We just wanted to look. Maybe see if there was something nice for your father's birthday next month." Michael smiled faintly, encouraging her to continue. "But," she paused, swallowing hard, "when we got there, they didn't welcome us. They looked at us like we didn't belong." The father shifted uncomfortably, his hand brushing over the tablecloth. "They said we couldn't afford anything there," he added quietly, bitterness creeping into his voice. "They said people like us don't belong in a place like that." Michael's expression hardened immediately. His back straightened, and he placed his hands flat on the table to steady himself. He had heard enough to understand. His mother's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "They humiliated us, son. Right there, in front of everyone. They laughed at us." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. Michael felt his fists clench slowly at his sides, his heart pounding with a slow, burning anger. But he kept his voice calm. "Did they say anything else?" he asked, his tone deceptively gentle. His father shook his head, his face grim. "No, just enough to make it clear we weren't wanted there." Michael exhaled slowly, trying to contain the emotions surging within him. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the casual cruelty, the unspoken assumption that his parents' worth could be measured by the color of their skin and the simplicity of their clothes. He stood up, walking over to the wide window that overlooked the garden. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared out into the fading light. His mother's voice, trembling and soft, broke the silence again. "We didn't want to cause trouble. We just left." Michael turned around slowly. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with a fire his parents hadn't seen in years. "You did nothing wrong," he said, each word deliberate. "Nothing." His parents exchanged a glance, the mother biting her lip, the father sighing heavily. "We know that, son," the father said slowly, "but it doesn't make it hurt any less." Michael nodded. "I understand, but believe me, this isn't something I'm going to let go." His mother looked alarmed. "Michael, we don't want this to cause problems for you." Michael crossed the room and knelt beside his mother's chair, taking her hand gently. "You're my parents," he said firmly. "If anyone has a problem with me standing up for you, that's their mistake, not mine." His mother squeezed his hand, her lips trembling. "We've spent our whole lives trying to stay quiet, trying not to stir up trouble." Michael's eyes softened, but his voice remained strong. "Maybe it's time we stopped staying quiet." His father leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant, thoughtful. We thought the world had changed, son. We thought things were better now." Michael smiled bitterly. "Some things have changed, but not enough." For a few minutes, they sat there in a heavy silence, the only sounds of the soft ticking of the antique clock on the sideboard and the faint rustle of the evening breeze outside. Finally, his father spoke again, his voice low and thoughtful. "I just don't understand, son. We never hurt anyone. We always tried to live decent, honest lives. Why do people still look down on us?" Michael looked at his father, his heart breaking a little at the question, the deep, honest confusion of a good man who had spent his life believing in fairness and decency. "They look down on us because they let their ignorance and prejudice blind them," Michael said softly. "They think they know everything about a person just by looking at them. Their hatred doesn't define us. It defines them." His mother wiped a tear from her cheek, her face etched with sadness and quiet dignity. "Is there even a way to change that, son?" Michael thought for a moment before answering. "We can't change everyone, but we can show them they're wrong. We can demand the respect we deserve." His father nodded slowly, a glimmer of pride in his tired eyes. "You're right. Maybe we've stayed silent too long." Michael smiled, a fierce, determined smile. "Exactly. It's not about revenge. It's about standing up and making it clear that this isn't acceptable. Not for us. Not for anyone." The mother smiled weakly, her hand still holding Michael's tightly. "We're proud of you, son." Michael stood up, looking down at them with deep love and a burning resolve. "And I'm proud of you. You taught me to live with dignity. Now it's my turn to defend it." The tension in the room eased slightly, replaced by a warm, quiet solidarity. The pain was still there, but now it was tempered by hope and by the knowledge that they would not face it alone. As the evening faded into night, the family remained together in the softly lit room, united by love, dignity, and the quiet promise of what was to come. Michael knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And tomorrow, he would make sure the world remembered it. The next morning, the city stirred to life under a soft, golden sunrise. Streets buzzed with early commuters, and the air was crisp with the promise of a new day. But in front of the luxury car dealership downtown, something unusual was happening, something that immediately caught the attention of every passerby. Two gleaming Rolls-Royce boat-tail cars, among the rarest and most expensive vehicles in the world, rolled up in perfect synchronization. Their sleek black exteriors shimmered under the morning sun, polished to a mirror shine. Each movement of the vehicles spoke of power, elegance, and undeniable wealth. Inside the dealership, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Employees and customers turned their heads toward the large glass windows, their conversations faltering into stunned silence. Eyes widened. Whispers began to ripple through the room. Even John Williams, the arrogant sales associate from the day before, looked up from his idle conversation with a colleague. He frowned slightly, trying to maintain his composure, but unease began to creep into his chest. He muttered under his breath, "Who's showing off so early in the morning?" trying to mask his growing curiosity with disdain. As the cars came to a graceful stop, the dealership seemed to hold its breath. The drivers stepped out first, dressed in immaculate uniforms, quickly moving to open the rear passenger doors. From the first car, Michael emerged. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, the fabric catching the light subtly. His posture was straight, his face calm, but there was an undeniable aura of authority around him. Every movement was deliberate, confident, commanding. And then, from the second car, the elderly couple stepped out. They wore the same modest clothes as the day before, the same well-worn jacket, the same simple floral dress. But today they moved differently. There was no hesitation in their steps, no fear or shame in their eyes. They carried themselves with quiet dignity, their heads held high as they stood beside their son. Inside the dealership, jaws dropped. Employees who had laughed and whispered cruelly the previous day now froze, their expressions shifting from casual curiosity to stunned disbelief. Customers stared openly, recognizing immediately that something extraordinary was unfolding before their eyes. John Williams' face turned pale. His heart pounded in his chest, and for the first time in a long while, he found himself speechless. A cold, sinking feeling settled in his stomach as he realized exactly who the elderly couple was. The same people he had mocked, dismissed, and humiliated just a day earlier. Michael took a moment, letting the silence stretch and settle heavily over the showroom before he moved. With slow, deliberate steps, he walked forward, his parents by his side. Each footfall on the polished marble floor echoed in the tense, expectant air. The dealership manager, who had just arrived in his office, noticed the commotion and hurriedly stepped out, his eyes widening at the sight of the Rolls-Royces and the commanding presence of the newcomers. He quickly assessed the situation and began moving toward the center of the room. Michael's gaze swept across the showroom, briefly taking in the stunned faces of the employees and customers. When his eyes locked onto John Williams, the arrogant salesman visibly flinched, instinctively taking a half step back. Michael stopped in the middle of the dealership. The entire room seemed to revolve around him now. Calmly, clearly, and with authority, he spoke. "Today," Michael said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the vast space, "I'm here to remind everyone of an important lesson, one that should never have needed repeating." His words were slow, deliberate, each one striking the room like a hammer blow. Dignity, respect, and the grave mistake of judging others based on their appearance. The silence was absolute. Not a breath was drawn, not a word was spoken. Everyone stood frozen, hanging on his every word. Michael's eyes never left John's face. "I trust that after yesterday," Michael continued, his tone still calm, but with an undeniable edge, "everyone here understands exactly why." John's face turned an even paler shade of white. He opened his mouth slightly, as if to say something, but no sound came out. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, and he shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the stares now directed at him. Michael's parents stood quietly beside him, their faces composed, their dignity restored by their son's presence and strength. At that moment, Emily Torres, standing near the front desk, felt her heart swell with emotion. She had witnessed the humiliation the day before and had done her best to stand up against it. Now, seeing the elderly couple return in such a powerful, dignified way, she felt a deep, almost overwhelming sense of pride and vindication. Michael took another step forward, his gaze unwavering. "I would like to request to review the security footage from yesterday's incident," he said, his voice calm but resolute, in front of everyone. The dealership manager, who had been standing awkwardly to the side, nodded quickly, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Yes, of course, sir," he said, his voice tight. "Please give us a moment." John Williams stood frozen, his hands twitching nervously. His mind raced, searching for some way to escape the looming consequences, but deep down he knew there was none. The manager hurried into his office, and an unbearable silence fell over the room. Customers whispered to each other behind their hands. Employees shifted uncomfortably, stealing guilty glances at John. The entire dealership seemed to vibrate with tension, every second stretching painfully long. After what felt like an eternity, the manager returned, holding a tablet in his hands. His face was grim. He cleared his throat, addressing the room. After thoroughly reviewing the security footage from yesterday, he began, his voice heavy, I can confirm that sales associate John Williams did, in fact, engage in highly offensive, disrespectful, and racially discriminatory behavior toward these customers. A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the showroom. All eyes turned to John, who stood frozen, his face drained of all color. The customers, who had witnessed the earlier events from afar without fully understanding them, now looked at him with clear disgust. Employees who had laughed and whispered the day before now lowered their heads in shame, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Michael stood silently, his expression calm but powerful, letting the manager's words hang in the air. The manager continued, his voice firm. This behavior is completely unacceptable and entirely contrary to the values we uphold here. John opened his mouth as if to protest, but no sound emerged. He seemed to wither under the collective judgment of the room. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing further for now. The damage was already done. The truth was out. And the triumphant return of the elderly couple was now complete, their dignity and worth laid bare for all to see, undeniable and unassailable. The dealership was silent, suffocating under the weight of what had just been said. Every person in the room seemed frozen, barely daring to breathe. John Williams stood stiffly by the front desk, his skin pale, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. Michael remained calm, his posture straight, his parents standing quietly behind him, their presence lending him even greater strength. The manager, still holding the tablet that displayed the damning footage, turned toward John with a grim expression. He took a deep breath, his voice sharp and final. John Williams, he said clearly enough for everyone to hear, with the severity of your actions and the undeniable disrespect you have shown, I have no choice but to inform you that, effective immediately, you are terminated from your position at this dealership. A few gasps broke the heavy silence. Employees shifted on their feet. Some dropped their heads in shame. Others exchanged quick, nervous glances. The words hung in the air like a final blow. John opened his mouth, desperate to defend himself, but found nothing he could say. His throat was dry, his mind blank. His usual arrogance, his smug demeanor, everything had been stripped away in a matter of minutes. His gaze darted around the room, but no one would meet his eyes. He was alone. Slowly, his shoulders sagging, John turned away from the center of the room. Each step he took toward the door sounded painfully loud against the marble floor, like the drumbeat of a long-overdue defeat. No one stopped him. No one said a word. As the door closed quietly behind him, a heavy sense of finality settled over the dealership. John Williams, the man who had mocked and judged so easily, was gone. Michael stood silently for a moment longer, letting the reality of what had happened fully sink in for everyone present. His gaze swept across the employees, across the customers, across everyone who had watched and done nothing the day before. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried a power that made every head lift to listen. We live in a society that claims to value dignity, respect, and equality, Michael said. But those values mean nothing if they are not upheld in our everyday actions, especially when no one is watching, and especially when it's uncomfortable. The employees stood still, their faces flushed with shame, their eyes fixed on Michael as he continued, "It is not enough to be silent when you witness injustice. Silence is complicity. Laughter at cruelty is complicity. Turning a blind eye is complicity." Emily Torres, standing quietly near the front of the room, felt her heart race. She had tried to intervene yesterday, tried to stand against what she knew was wrong. Hearing Michael's words filled her with both pride and a deep sense of validation. Michael turned toward the dealership manager. "I trust you will ensure that what happened here yesterday is not forgotten," he said. The manager nodded solemnly, his face pale and serious. "Yes, sir. It won't be forgotten." Michael gave a small nod and turned back to face the room. Respect is not a privilege reserved for a few. It is a right owed to every human being, regardless of appearance, wealth, or status. His voice was steady, but beneath it was a raw intensity that left no room for misunderstanding. A long silence followed. Then, slowly, a few employees began to lower their heads in acknowledgement. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others looked at Michael and his parents with genuine regret in their eyes. The customers, too, seemed deeply moved, whispering among themselves, casting glances heavy with guilt and newfound awareness. Michael's father placed a hand gently on his son's shoulder, pride shining in his eyes. His mother, tears shimmering in her gaze, smiled softly, no longer from sadness, but from a swelling sense of gratitude and vindication. For the first time since the previous day's humiliation, they stood tall, proud, and whole. They were no longer the silent victims of injustice. They were the undeniable victors of dignity. Michael looked once more at the dealership employees, delivering the final message they would remember long after he and his parents had left. "Let this be a lesson to everyone," he said. "Never judge another person by the color of their skin or the simplicity of their clothes. You have no idea who they are, what they've accomplished, or what battles they have fought. You have no idea what their worth is." He paused. "And it is never your place to decide." The words fell like stones into the silence, rippling outward, embedding themselves deep into the hearts and minds of everyone present. Michael gave a small, respectful nod to the manager, then turned to his parents. Together, without any further words, they moved toward the entrance. As they passed through the dealership, employees stepped back respectfully, clearing a path. Some whispered apologies. Some simply stood frozen, their faces marked with the weight of their own complicity. Michael's father and mother walked with quiet dignity, their heads held high, their hands linked together tightly. The weight of yesterday's pain was still there, but now it was joined by something stronger, a sense of triumph, of resilience, of reclaimed pride. The dealership's glass doors opened smoothly before them, the early morning sunlight streaming in as if to welcome them back into a world that, at least for today, had been forced to see them for who they truly were. As they stepped outside, the cool morning breeze brushed against their faces, carrying away the last remnants of the humiliation they had endured. In its place remained only strength. Michael followed close behind them, his gaze steady, his heart filled with determination. He knew this was not the end. There was still so much work to be done, so much injustice to confront, so many battles to fight. But today, at least, justice had prevailed, and it was a beginning. As Michael and his parents stepped back into the dealership, the heavy glass doors closed behind them with a quiet hiss, sealing them inside a room now filled with stunned silence. Every employee, Every customer turned to watch them, but this time the gazes were not filled with judgment or disdain. They were filled with respect, awe, and a deep, uncomfortable reflection. Michael stood still for a moment, his parents by his side. His gaze swept across the showroom, calm and composed, before finally settling on someone standing near the front desk. Emily Torres. The young Latina sales associate had remained quiet during the entire confrontation, her hands nervously clutching the folder she had been holding earlier. When Michael's eyes found her, she straightened slightly, startled. Michael took a step forward, his voice breaking the silence with a calm strength that resonated through the room. "Emily Torres," he said, his tone even but firm. All eyes turned toward Emily, who blinked in surprise, her heart pounding in her chest. She took a small step forward, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, it's me," she said, her nerves evident. Michael smiled gently, a smile that softened the tension in the room. "On behalf of my parents," he said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the dealership, "I sincerely thank you for what you did yesterday. You were the only one who treated them with true respect and kindness." Emily's cheeks flushed with emotion. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Michael continued before she could speak. "You could have stayed silent like the others," he said, his tone kind but pointed, "but you chose to stand up. You chose to be better." The employees shifted uncomfortably, their shame deepening. Then Michael turned to the dealership manager, his voice taking on a more formal tone. "I have decided to purchase the car my parents were interested in yesterday," he said, his gaze never wavering. "The $3 million model." A collective gasp swept through the room. Michael didn't pause. "And I want the full commission from this sale to go directly to Emily Torres." Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. She shook her head, slightly overwhelmed. "Sir, I only did what was right," she stammered. "I really can't accept this." Michael smiled warmly. "No," he said firmly, "you deserve it, Emily. People like you, who choose to do the right thing even when it's hard, deserve to be recognized and rewarded." The manager, who had been standing silently nearby, stepped forward, his face serious. "I fully agree with Mr. Michael," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "And I would also like to announce another important decision. Starting today, Emily Torres will be promoted to senior manager of our dealership." The room erupted into whispers of surprise. Some employees looked genuinely happy for Emily. Others looked ashamed of their previous behavior. A few clapped softly, and slowly the applause grew. Emily stood frozen, her eyes wide, tears brimming but not falling. She looked at Michael, gratitude and disbelief shining on her face. Michael moved forward, extending his hand toward her. "Thank you once again, Emily," he said warmly. "You've shown that in any circumstance, kindness and compassion will always triumph over prejudice." Emily reached out and shook his hand, her grip firm despite the tremble in her fingers. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing in that." Standing nearby, Michael's parents watched the exchange with soft smiles. Their eyes shone, not with sadness as the day before, but with pride and gratitude. In Emily, they saw not just a kind employee, but a reflection of the hope they had long carried in their hearts, a hope that kindness and courage still existed in the world. The other employees watched in silence, many of them reflecting deeply on their actions and thoughts from the day before. The lesson had been clear and public. The damage of their prejudice could never be fully undone, but perhaps in witnessing this moment, they could begin to change. Michael turned back to his parents, his expression softening. "Shall we?" he asked gently. His parents nodded. Together, the three of them began walking slowly toward the door. The luxury car dealership, filled with so many eyes just the day before, brimming with mockery and judgment, now watched them leave in complete silence, a silence heavy with respect, reflection, and a lingering shame. The glass doors opened smoothly once again, and the family stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The Rolls-Royce cars waited for them, gleaming under the sunlight. As they moved toward the vehicles, Michael glanced back once, catching a final look at the showroom behind them. He saw the bowed heads, the quiet stares, the subdued atmosphere. But more than that, he saw Emily Torres standing tall, her head held high, her eyes shining with a quiet strength. He smiled to himself. Sometimes it took only one act of kindness to begin changing everything. Inside the dealership, the employees remained frozen long after the family had left. The lesson they had learned today would not be forgotten. It was not just about the firing of John Williams or the public embarrassment they had witnessed. It was about something much deeper. It was about the fact that true worth is not measured by appearance or status, but by dignity, compassion, and the courage to do what is right. Emily stood still, the applause for her promotion slowly fading. She understood that what had happened today was far greater than a personal victory. It was a reminder for everyone, herself included, that every small act of goodness mattered. It had the power to change lives, to heal wounds, to restore dignity, and sometimes to quietly but profoundly change the world. Thank you for watching this story until the end. It's a powerful reminder. Never judge people by their appearance. True worth lies much deeper. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about this story in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.